Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in here as we just finish up our first workshop for the course, the short fiction workshop, so writing short stories, which I think went great. I really enjoyed reading people's work, and like I've mentioned before, I am really in some ways more concerned and spend more time looking at the comments or the feedback that people are providing, because again, I can provide sort of general commentary on short stories, but it's really getting feedback from that group of your peers, sometimes 2 or 3 or even 4 other people, that provides you as the writer with so much then to work with, which sort of leads to where we're at now. Because of the nature of the course, we don't spend a lot of time on any one genre, so we don't write a whole bunch of stories or a whole bunch of poems or whatever. As an intro course, even though I don't think a lot of people are sort of just starting out as writers, but the nature of the course is that we sort of sample a number of different genres. So we've done the short story one, you've got some feedback, and now it's sort of up to you really. There's no like mandate from me or within the course to then take that short story and the feedback you've gotten and do major revisions, resubmit it, submit it for publication somewhere. So it's kind of in your hands now in terms of what you want to do with that. Obviously, I would encourage anybody and everybody to revise based on the feedback, continue working with whatever piece you submitted. You can always get in touch with me if you want a little more specific feedback in terms of the short story itself. Obviously, as you might either know already or you'll learn very quickly, being a writer, often you need to have certain goals for yourself, very practical goals. So the benefit of taking a course is sometimes just that there's due dates and you have to write a short story or a poem or whatever it happens to be. But it's also important to kind of develop your own goals in terms of, okay, I want to take my short story and submit it to this literary journal. There's a really great one at COD called Prairie Light Review that I'll provide a link to here in this announcement. So while there's nothing, again, within the course that now you have to do with that short story and the feedback, it's really important if you're kind of serious about, being a writer, is to not just revise the short story, but revise it sort of with the goal to doing something with it. Because ultimately what you'll find is without that goal or without that sort of forward-looking focus, you just sort of, maybe you work on it a bit, but then it gets left behind, and maybe you start another story, but you don't finish that one because, well, there's no sort of purpose to what you're doing. At least I know that's how it is for me, and I think most writers are that way, at least to some degree, maybe not totally, but most of us need a kind of purpose or direction or goal that we're moving towards. So again, if you want to be in touch with me for some more specific feedback, that's great. If not, that's great too. Certainly consider what you want to then do with that short story, because it's now kind of up to you. There's nothing within the course that pushes you back into, working with that any further. So again, we move forward in our course. So just looking at the due dates here really quickly. Just finished up Unit 5 then. Again, that fairly long time we have for submitting your story and then providing feedback, which I think is good, because it gives people a lot of time to really engage with the material, but it does force us to compress other things. So we have a very quick turnaround then. Thursday, June 12th, we have both Unit 6 and Unit 7 due, which are sort of transitional units before Unit 8, which is our next workshop unit, creative nonfiction. So the next genre we're in is called creative nonfiction. Honestly, while you can spend tons of time thinking about the differences or what makes a short story and not something else, the lines really blur sort of the more you think about it. So we're not super concerned with coming up with like perfect definitions of what a short story is versus a creative nonfiction essay versus something else. But it does have some unique features, the creative nonfiction that we're looking at now. So just looking into the units then, the first thing that we're doing in Unit 6 is really sort of, again, a transition away from short fiction per se and into this nonfiction. And so we have a couple of readings here and then a very brief discussion board. So one of the things that you want to sort of be doing maybe in the big picture is beginning to think about what creative nonfiction really means. And again, there's no real perfect definition, and sometimes the line between it and a very kind of personal short story are fairly blurry. But in some ways, creative nonfiction takes things that really happened, so that's the nonfiction part, but presents them in a way that is compelling to another reader, which you might have done for your short story. So you might already be kind of working in this genre. But the question that most of these kinds of writers get asked is, did that really happen to you? And their answers usually are something like, yeah, but maybe not exactly in the way. So certain kind of artistic license, can be taken to change not big things, but minor details to make, a story or a creative nonfiction piece, to make it have kind of more meaning. And again, meaning for an outside reader. So the thing to keep in mind with creative nonfiction is that in some ways it's really easy because you're writing from your personal experience. So you don't really have to make up a story, you just tell us what happened. But like we've talked about before, you really do have to keep in mind that your reader, right, the ideal reader, doesn't know you, doesn't know, you're not in the class together, has really no connection to you. And again, this like the theoretical reader. So they're not going to read something that happened to you, even if it's traumatic. They might be like, oh, well, it's too bad that happened to this person that I don't know. But to have an impact, there needs to be something kind of, again, the literary or the creative part to it. Needs to be something that's maybe odd or meaningful or kind of metaphorical. So it still has a lot of the elements or the aspects of short fiction that we've already talked about and looked at. And again, the more I sort of talk about it on this theoretical level, probably the less clear it becomes, which is why it's most useful to just sort of see it in action, which is what units 6 and 7 have us doing. So 6, again, fairly straightforward, and then 7 has us doing or sort of participating in a really interesting series that is developed. It's the This I Believe series. You may have heard it on the radio or whatever. But it's a series of what really amount to creative nonfiction pieces. People telling their story, but not just in a kind of journalistic, like reporting the facts kind of way, but trying to develop or derive or, communicate some meaning in the telling of what, quote unquote, actually happened. So it's really interesting. And again, the assignment here is to write your own This I Believe piece for our discussion board. But what I really want to see is some evidence that you've looked at a number of these examples. And so even if, again, you can't like define creative nonfiction because we're not super interested in that kind of the academic side of it, I want to see that you understand sort of how it like feels or sounds, especially those nuances that do make it distinct from short fiction or other kinds of genres, which then finally gets us to, like after a whole 2 days, gets us to Unit 8, which is our next workshop, where you're writing, again, a piece where there's no like limits or bounds or requirements exactly, except that it be creative nonfiction. And again, you're making an effort to kind of mirror the aspects you see going on in the examples we've read. We focus in Unit 8 on a writer who actually teaches here at COD and is, to be perfectly honest, one of the most, I think, nationally well-known figures who works in this genre. So it's kind of cool to be so close to fame. I should get his autograph or something. And he's a really nice guy. But there's a couple of excerpts from a few of his books here. And again, rather than trying to come to some academically useful, like official definition of creative nonfiction, it's most useful to just read examples and see kind of how they sound and how they work and how meaning emerges from them without them having to be these sort of fanciful fictional, like sci-fi, fantasy types of things. So even if it's not a genre that you end up liking or feeling like, oh, I'm definitely going to work in this particular genre, it's actually a great exercise, especially if you find yourself, and many people do, wanting to write about really sort of out there, what I would sort of call genre fiction, zombie stories, vampire stuff, sci-fi, things that occur in worlds like gaming worlds, video game worlds, where in many cases there's really elaborate stories that exist in those universes and very elaborate characters and character relationships, which is great, but it's really easy to get lost in the trappings of that genre or that universe or that world that you're working in. And so your own story kind of gets left out because you do so much either explaining how things work in the world for outside readers who don't know, or depending on the tension, the elements that exist already in that type of genre, that you're not really doing a lot of work as a writer yourself. So creative nonfiction, even if you don't really love it, as a long-term thing, is a great exercise to force yourself out of that kind of habit, if that's the type of fiction you end up sort of drawn to writing. And of course, you might actually love creative nonfiction. It's a genre that's probably the least familiar to me, in as much as I don't write it very often, and I don't even read it very often. I tend to be like a poet first, and then sort of a short story guy, and then tons of very boring academic writing. So I always enjoy it because it sort of like forces me to engage with this thing that I'm not otherwise really a part of on a regular basis. So anyway, lots on our plate as usual. We are pretty much past midterm in the course already, so we're really flying fast. So keep on top of those due dates. And again, if you want to talk about your short story a little bit more, by all means be in touch with me. Or certainly if you just have other, course kind of questions, I'm always available. So I'll talk to you soon, and enjoy our move into creative nonfiction here.